gun, I'm not always going to be thrilled to play huge pots post-flop. So if I'm going to get raised on the flop, the turn of the river, I'm definitely going to show a little bit more caution and give my opponent a lot of respect, mostly because of our positional considerations. So one thing that I think about all the time when I'm playing Rush is what positions are me and my opponent. If we're both in positions where both of us should have extraordinarily tight ranges, and this is a situation where both of us should have our absolute tightest ranges, I'm generally going to proceed pretty cautiously when my opponent wants to play a big pot with me. However, if we're in a situation where both of us should have very loose ranges, for example, if my opponent is in the cutoff and I'm on the button, situations where both of us should be playing a lot of hands because we're going to have our positional advantage and we're going to be able to act after our opponents very often. With those loose ranges, there's going to be more bluffing, there's going to be more light call downs, light raises, so you're definitely going to have to splash around more. But you really shouldn't be splashing around that often when your players are initially under the gun. So he calls me. Again, I put him mostly on pocket pairs. He's going to have a lot of like whiffed ace-king, ace-queen type boards. Just going to go ahead and make my standard continuation bet. He just folds there, so probably had a hand like, ace-king, ace-queen, and below. On table 4, I go ahead and open Jack 10 suited, the small blind versus the big blind. The first thing I'd like to say is because I'm going to be out of position for the entire hand, that is, I have to act first on every post-flop street, I'm going to play very tightly from my small blind. I'm probably playing maybe 20 to 25% of hands. Compare this to when I'm on the button, when I'm playing 45 to 55% of hands. So I'm at least half as tight. There's only 2 of us, so in general, hand strengths are not going to be as powerful. Like a hand like Jack 10 suited is going to, in general, fare pretty well against one other player. I'm definitely going to come in raising, because I'm very happy if Economist just goes ahead and folds, so I'll be leveraging the little bit of fold equity I have here. The one thing, however, is that because I'm going to be out of position for the entire hand, my opponent, if he's aware, if he's aggressive, if he's intelligent, if he's a thinking player, is going to take advantage of that and is going to re-raise me a lot from the big blind. He's going to call on a lot of flops, and I'm not going to be really sure where I am. And my life's just going to be pretty difficult because my opponent always gets to see what I do first, and I'm always going to have to kind of just, I get to see how he reacts, but I'm always going to be guessing on post-flop streets. So when my opponent is really good in the big blind, I'm going to be giving up quite a bit from the small blind. I'm only folding 10 cents in this spot, which is just, obviously 10 cents is just not that much. When you get to higher limits, where the blinds become like $2 and $4, I'm giving up $2 every time I fold there, but I might be giving up $12 to $14 or even more post-flop if I play too many hands. All that being said, if I am the big blind and the small blind is really coming after me, I'm going to make his life a living hell. I feel like as the big blind, it is my responsibility, almost my duty, to just pound on that small blind all day, make his life absolutely terrible, and begin making the small blind get so frustrated that either he spazzes out against me and I just stack him when he does something hilariously spewy, or he's just going to actually give up all the time and just fold to me and give me what's called a walk, that is, just let me have my blinds. So every time he does that, I get to pick up that extra 10 cents, or at higher limits, $2, for absolutely doing nothing, just because my opponent has a fear instilled in him, which is obviously really good. As a player, I try to play aggressively, and I really like to instill what I like to call the fear in my opponents. So I go ahead and raise, and I hit top pair, so this is a really good board to continue on. So just go ahead and put in, what seems to be a standard continuation bet, and he goes ahead and calls. Now, let's talk about his calling range here. If my opponent has a hand like a pair of nines, or I'm sorry, 3 of a kind or better with nines, he probably is just going to go ahead and raise me on the flop. Now, this is the problem with position. Usually he's going to go ahead and raise me, especially at a limit like 25 where I think my opponents are very straightforward. I expect that a guy here is just going to be like, oh, I got trips, I'm going to go ahead and raise. However, when I'm playing against more sophisticated opponents who are capable of mixing it up, this is definitely a spot where he could just call the flop with nines to disguise his range and get me to dump money to him later street because I've misread his hand. When this guy calls me here, I don't know anything about him. He started with a full stack. He might recognize who I am because I've been making instructional videos and I've played at these limits for months and months at a time, years in terms of making videos. I think in general, when people peel here, they sometimes have ace high. They sometimes have a pair smaller than mine. He can have a hand like 10-8, 10-7 suited. There aren't too many tens that are worse than mine. A lot of tens are going to be better. They're going to be hands like queen 10, jack 10, etc. He's also going to have a medium range of pairs here. I think like sevens, eights, and sixes, and even fives probably calls the flop. This guy might peel the flop with any pair, which I actually don't think is terrible, like to just call with deuces. And he also might be calling with any kind of odd draw. So if he's got Queen Jack, King Queen, King Jack, all of those are hands that are 2 overs and a gut shot. And against my hand, those are going to often have, from his perspective, at least 10 outs. So it's going to be worth calling and then kind of evaluating what I do on the turn. And this is the power of position. Now, if I don't have a hand, what do? Did I put him on a draw on the flop? Should I continue firing? If I continue firing, is he necessarily just going to fold? Is he going to raise and try to represent trips sometimes? If I have a really strong hand, do I keep betting, hoping that he's got some kind of draw that he's going to keep calling with? Do I check to set a trap and let him spew into me? I'm not really sure, simply because I'm out of position. I'm going to have to do a lot of guesswork. And here, we're actually going to see an example where I guess incorrectly. I'm going to assume that this guy is a regular player. He calls this flop, which is going to be standard with a lot of his Broadway type hands. I'd probably call here with any 2 face cards. Also, this is going to be a spot where he's also going to have quite a few smaller pairs. So against that overall range, I actually decide to check and look like I'm giving up. This is a spot where if I didn't have anything, I'd probably just check fold on the turn. So I'm going to check and hope that if he's got a hand like King Queen or Jack Queen, that he's going to go ahead and put in a bet that is going to be incorrect against me because he thinks I have nothing and he wants to get me to fold, but I'm actually going to call. Sometimes this is a spot where if I check and my opponent has pocket sevens, he's going to be so worried about protecting his hand, he's just worried about giving off a free card, that he's just going to go ahead and bet, in which case I can just call, and then I get to extract 2 streets of value when I'm ahead, which obviously is a wonderful result. So I go ahead and check, and he goes ahead and checks back. So when he checks back, it really looks like that he's got a hand like Queen Jack, King Queen, or a small pocket pair. I river 2 pair here. Obviously, if he's got a hand like Queen Jack or King Jack, he's no longer going to, or he's going to definitely call a bet on the river. If he's got a hand like pocket sevens or pocket eights, he's probably just going to just fold to the river bet, which is unfortunate. There's really no way that I can extract value from those kind of hands. So I'm definitely going to bet. I have 2 pair here. I think my hand is best. I think if my opponent had a hand like a 9 on the turn, he'd just go ahead and bet it. So I go ahead and put in the bet. Usually if I get raised on this river here, it's some kind of dirty trap that my opponent has set with a hand like, he might have King Queen on this river, he can have trips, so I'm probably going to end up folding to the raise. Again, my read is at this limit, most of the players are really, really straightforward, so going to find the fold there, and he just calls. So when he just calls, I'm like, oh, okay, he had King Jack or Queen Jack, but my opponent actually surprises me and shows me bottom full house, which is not the hand that I was expecting to see. If I was him on the flop, I'd probably call against most aggressive opponents. On 10-9-9, they're not going to have that many pairs, so I think peeling and tending to try to get to a showdown is perfectly reasonable. Or if the turn and river come really bad and my opponent shows weakness, I might go ahead and do what's called turning my hand into a bluff. That is, even though I do have some showdown with fives, showdown value with fives, I might go ahead and bet, trying to get my opponent to fold a slightly better hand. For example, if the turn came like a queen and a king, and my opponent decided that he was just going to give up, I might go ahead and bet to try to get him off of a 10 or even a hand like pocket sevens, which is not very strong, but is definitely better than mine at showdown. On the turn, I do like his check. It kind of looks like I'm giving up. That was definitely the goal of my turn check. So he checks back to try to kind of disguise his hand. But once you've disguised such an incredibly strong hand, when your opponent bets the river on a river that often looks like it has improved him to 1 or 2 pair, you should very, very often be raising. You have a full house. For 2 streets of value in a heads-up pot, blind on blind, your hand is essentially the effective nuts. It's very, very strong. You should be really willing to get it all in. So I was really surprised that he just called me on the river. Totally thought he was going to raise me. He should have raised. Very fortunately, I was going to fold to the raise anyway, so wasn't going to get too much more value out of me, but, I'm going to find a fold there. There's plenty of opponents who aren't going to find that fold. On table 2, I go ahead and raise 8-9 suited under the gun, which is kind of a loose raise and definitely not my standard, but because I was making a video, I thought it would be kind of interesting. So I go ahead and make that raise, and then I flop a pair of 9s on the flop and decide to just go ahead and bet. Now, there are not that many hands that I am going to get value from here. Very few hands are going to call me that are worse than mine. I'm probably not going to get a hand like pocket 7s to call me, again, simply because I raised under the gun. I look like I should have a pretty strong range. I'm going to have a lot of aces in my under the gun range, so a hand like pocket 7s, pocket 6s, pocket 4s probably should just go ahead and fold the flop. However, I don't have too many reads against this guy, Mick Stepson. The one read I have, looking at my HUD, is that this guy folds to continuation bets 65% of the time. So I know that if I bet this flop 65% of the time, I'm just going to go ahead and pick up the $2, and I know I'm going to be showing a profit there. However, if I check, while I might have the best hand, he might now be able to win the pot from me even when he has air. So this is a spot where if I just check and he goes ahead and bets the flop, or he bets the flop on the turn, or I'm just going to have a lot of difficulty playing against him. I'll be out of position. I won't have what's called the betting lead, which is kind of the aggressive initiative. Very often when you are the raiser pre-flop, you want to continue to put on the aggression post-flop, because it just gives you kind of an idea of where you are by seeing how your opponent reacts. So I just go ahead and bet, because I don't know if check calling is going to be a profitable play, but I know betting for sure is the plus EV play. I get called on the flop. Usually here, I think my opponent has a hand like an ace. He's got a pair stronger than a 9, so pocket 10s and above all are probably going to call the flop. He probably doesn't have that many 9s, because I don't think that this guy who looks tight to me is going to have a lot of hands like mine, like 8-9 or 9-10, simply because I raised under the gun, and again, he should be defending with a pretty strong range. There's sometimes he's going to have a hand like pocket 5s, in which case he's got 3 of a kind. It's less likely that he has pocket 9s, simply because I hold what's called a blocker. That means I have a 9 myself, so it's just less likely that he's got pocket 9s. From a combination standpoint, there are with a 5 on the board, there are 3 combinations of pocket 5s in my opponent's range. However, because I hold a 9, there's only 1 combination of him having 3 of a kind 9s. So, but since I hold a blocker, it reduces the likelihood of my opponent having a hand by 1/3, which doesn't sound like much, but that's quite a bit. Again, my range looks pretty strong. Even though my range looks pretty strong, he still continued against it on a board that really looks like it hits me, so this is going to be a pretty easy fold on the turn. So this is something that you're going to see me stress a lot, is the concept of perceived ranges. I look strong, and then he calls me, so he looks even stronger. So that means I probably shouldn't be bluffing that often. On table 1, I just go ahead and continuation bet. King 6-6 is the driest of flops. I definitely don't think I'm going to be getting him to fold a hand like 7s or above. I'm probably going to be firing here with just with all of my range. I'm going to be firing here with all of my bluffs, all of my like medium strength hands, so like pocket 7s, pocket 8s. I'm just going to go ahead and bet, because betting is going to be a clearly EV play here. If I have a hand like pocket 8s, check calling might be a little difficult, because I'm not going to know what to do on turns and rivers if my opponent continues to show aggression. If the turn comes bad for my pocket 8s, for example, if a queen comes on the turn, I'm not really going to know what to do. So, it's going to be a little sketchy to proceed, especially if my opponent is good and aggressive and can kind of read my hand. And also, I'm going to bet here, obviously, all my kings and stronger, all my trip 6s as well. So my range is what I like to think of as defended. If my opponent has a hand like pocket 2s here, it's actually probably better for him to just go ahead and muck the flop, simply because, as an aggressive player, I might follow through on a lot of turns and rivers. Obviously, this is a pretty good turn for my hand, because it now gives me an open-ended straight draw, so I'm going to continue to fire. One of the reasons I'm going to continue to fire here is because I'm not going to always just give up on the turn when I don't have anything. Sometimes, when I have a bluff, in this case I have jack high, I'm going to want to continue to try and get my opponent to fold the weaker parts of his range. So while my opponent calls me on the flop with a king, he might call me with 6s. He also might call me with a hand like pocket 9s, pocket 7s, pocket 8s. This guy may call me with a hand as weak as pocket 5s or even pocket 4s. Something that just says, hey, I have a pair, right? It's a very dry board. I'm probably going to continue. So I'm going to continue to fire here to try to get him to fold his hands that are like pocket jacks and below. It's less likely that he's got a hand like jacks or tens, simply because I hold in a jack and a 10. But any pair nines and below, I probably can get to fold here. I'm not going to be able to get him to fold a king here, but that's going to be